I think it's pretty clear that President Donald Trump is going to announce probably within the next week. It'll give him a chance and all the rest of us a chance to see what happens. If he catches fire again, it probably makes people like DeSantis and others think twice about running. If it's lukewarm or not good at all, maybe it opens the field, not just to DeSantis, but Abbott, Kristi Noem, Nikki Haley, Mike Pompeo, Mike Pence, Ted Cruz, you name it, the whole universe out there.
Speaking of shifts, I don't know if you've seen any of this, but a lot of people are saying that, Gen Z, which is now voting for the first time, that they're all coming in. And in essence, they're sort of default leftists. They've been taught that socialism is cool, that big government is good, you should just be given stuff and all this. It's obviously counter to the work that you guys do. And I've spoke at many Young America's events, and people are excited about freedom and all that. But it is an uphill battle for sure.
Oh, it totally is, because it's starting younger and younger. I mean, we just took over, in addition to the Reagan Ranch out in California, this last year we took over the Reagan Boy at Home in the middle of the country in Dixon, Illinois, where we have conferences, but we also occasionally have tours and school groups that come through. Our director recently told me that some fifth grade students that were there with a class trip loved the tour, but at one point our director was talking about how Reagan, his actions, as we just recognized this past week, November 9th, the 33rd anniversary of the Berlin Wall coming down, the fall of communism. He's talking about communism. And the kid said, well, what's wrong with communism? And the guy was like bewildered. And he's like, we're taught that that's a system of government that helps people. Like, no, this is not it at all. But it's sadly what we've seen for years on college campuses. We actually have a suit against the administrators at Clovis Community College in Fresno, California, where during Freedom Week last year, we had, our chapter there had posters that were pre-approved to put up. The posters showed a woman in the old Soviet Union standing in a grocery store where there was no food on the shelves, which sadly was pretty frequent back then, as it is in places like Cuba and Venezuela today. And it said, got milk, got bread, got blankets, got anything. And it was obviously making a point about communism and socialism not working. And the administrators literally took the posters down and claimed the reason for that was because it was offensive to communists. Well, hell yeah, it's offensive to communists. That's because they're wrong. It's the truth. We got to get the truth out. And it's got to happen sooner, because the indoctrination is happening younger and younger along the way.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible that that's leaking into elementary school at this point. But I suppose at some level, none of this should surprise us. Going back to a bit of the racehorse politics for a moment, the big thing in Republican politics or in conservative politics, whatever you want to call it, is sort of this Trump-DeSantis thing that seems to be bursting forth, whether we like it or not. What's your take, and what do you think is going to happen?
Well, I think it'll be interesting just because of Ron DeSantis just having been reelected. He's obviously going to focus on being governor in the short term someday, whether it's 2024 or 2028 or at some point. I think he'll run and be an excellent candidate. But that may not be the worst of all scenarios, because I think it's pretty clear that President Donald Trump is going to announce probably within the next week. It'll give him a chance and all the rest of us a chance to see what happens. If he catches fire again, it probably makes people like DeSantis and others think twice about running. If it's lukewarm or not good at all, maybe it opens the field, not just to DeSantis, but Abbott, Kristi Noem, Nikki Haley, Mike Pompeo, Mike Pence, Ted Cruz, you name it, the whole universe out there. And I think, as much as I don't talk and tweet the way that Donald Trump does, I do think he's earned the right, based upon what he did during those 4 years as president. He has, without a doubt, earned the right to be at least at the top of the list of consideration. Doesn't guarantee that he'll win the nomination or be elected president, but I think he's at least earned it. I was suspect early on, but my goodness, I mean, tax cuts, regulatory reform, some of the greatest judicial nominations I've ever seen, even simple things like doing what nobody else had the guts to do and moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. I mean, there's a whole cross-section of things that most of us as conservatives, even from a libertarian's point of view, never dreamed were possible, that this guy got accomplished. Now, does he always talk or tweet or have the same tone that many of us do? Probably not. But again, I like people who do more than just people who talk, and for that he earns a lot of credit.
You mentioned
I do think at the flip side of it is he's got a little bit of a challenge, though, I think, because many of the people that he endorsed in the primaries, either didn't win or, like with Vance, wouldn't have won without DeWine. And so that'll be part of the equation as well.
Right. And again, as we're taping this, we still don't know what's happening with Kari Lake and with Blake Masters and Laxalt. So some of this could shake out a little bit better for him, but we'll kind of see. But since you mentioned the Libertarians, on Twitter at least, there's always this war with the Libertarians. You know, basically, do we remain hardcore Libertarians and only vote for Libertarian candidates? Or obviously we're a bit closer to being Republicans, certainly, than Democrats. Do we align there? Again, these are all the ideas that Young America's Foundation are talking about all the time. What do you think sort of strategically for the person that's out there that just, it's limited government, it's low or no taxes, states' rights, that's it. What do you think they should be doing?
Well, I think the simple answer is don't ever let the perfect be the enemy of the very good. And by that, I don't mean just universally, if you're a Libertarian, vote Republican. But I do think don't limit yourself to solely voting Libertarian, because while that's great on principle, it doesn't get things done. I think Reagan certainly was a great person at bringing different coalitions together. I hope during my 8 years in office, 3 elections, of which the recall was one of the biggest in the nation, we were able to do that. We reined in government. One of the biggest frustrations to me, I don't even remember this, but a few years ago, Matt Bevin, the governor of the Commonwealth of Kentucky, arguably at the time the most libertarian-like candidate in the country, a guy who aggressively cut red tape, who aggressively reined in the government, who cut taxes, who took on these big issues in Kentucky. And he lost that election just barely, and the margin by which he lost to Beshear, the current governor, was less than the margin of what the Libertarian candidate for governor got in that race. And so to me, it's just a great reminder. I get it with some of these, what some people might call rhinos, people who are like a lot of government spending, who are just a little bit less bad than the Democrat running in the race. But in that case, it was a prime example. This is a guy that Libertarians should love. This is a guy that Libertarians should want to replicate around the country, and yet they got behind a candidate who effectively set that margin down, and now you got a full-scale, big spending, big government Democrat in there. To me, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. Don't do it across the board. Make those candidates, those conservative Republican candidates, earn it, and then hold them accountable when they get in the office. And I think Libertarians can make some real inroads that way.
Let's talk about the other side of the coin here. The progressives have basically just taken over the Democrat Party, and I think, unfortunately, because of the results that are kind of wishy-washy this week, I think they'll basically feel emboldened. Do you think there's any stopping that movement within the Democrat Party? I would imagine, I'm not totally well-versed in Wisconsin politics, but I would imagine you've probably got some moderate or had some moderate Democrats in Wisconsin back in the day, but they all seem to be gone at a national level now.
Well, even in the states. I mean, when I was governor, and certainly years before, a long time ago, when I was briefly in the state legislature, but even a few years ago when I was governor, there were still a few of the kind of traditional blue dog, outstate, somewhat rural area Democrats who were somewhat moderate to conservative in some issues, but were aligned with unions and other things along the way. They're gone. They're gone. Most of those districts, it's one of the unique phenomena, while the suburbs moved away from Republicans under President Trump, more I think based on tone than on policy. The flip side of that is, a lot of those rural blue-collar areas around my state and around the country, a lot of those Democrats who'd held those seats before, boy, this wave came in and good, solid Republican candidates won those seats. So that shift has certainly happened in Wisconsin, but I think arguably elsewhere in the country. And nationally, think about this. Joe Biden, who ran just a few years ago, 2.5 years ago, Joe Biden on Super Tuesday was basically positioning himself as a more mainstream alternative to Bernie Sanders. He eventually got Mayor Pete and Senator Klobuchar out of his lane, the mainstream, more moderate lane, because he knew you had all these other people. You had Bernie and Elizabeth Warren and others in the far left-wing lane. But the irony was he did that to win the primary and then did the opposite of what traditionally happens. He then went out in the general and ran hard to the left to get Bernie and AOC support and basically outsourced his agenda to them. Remember, Kamala Harris actually had a voting record the year before she was picked that was further to the left than the self-proclaimed socialist Bernie Sanders. And he hasn't stopped since.
If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about politics instead of nonstop yelling, check out our politics playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, watch our full episode playlist all right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.